Very good afternoon to all of you once again. I'm so thankful to have you in our Bible study today. We left off in 2 Samuel 12, where David has repented. He was confronted by the prophet Nathan. He has repented of his affair with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah, but the sword shall never leave his house, he's told. He is not getting away with it, and that prophecy picks up right away after those things are told to him. And it came to pass after this, after his great victory with the Ammonites, remember at the end of chapter 12, and it came to pass after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister, whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Now Amnon is the firstborn son of David. He's the prince of Israel, the one that's expected to be succeeding him throughout all Israel. They believe this. So he's looked at as the crowned prince. And unto David were born sons born in Hebron, and his firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, the woman right after Abigail that David married. And his second, Chileab. Now remember these names, okay? Chileab, because it's going to come up here in just a few minutes. And his second, Chileab of Abigail, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And the third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. So Amnon is right under David. And then you have Chileab right under Amnon. And then right next in line from Chileab is Absalom. And Absalom, remember this, Absalom is the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. So Absalom's grandfather is the king of Geshur. That'll come up at the end of this chapter. Remember that is his grandfather. So it tells us that Amnon he's love struck by his half sister Tamar, which is Absalom's full-blooded sister. And Amnon was so vexed that he fell sick for his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and Amnon thought it hard for him to do anything to her. You see, virginity back then was viewed as very, very sacred for the women, especially for the princess within the king's palace. It was supposed to be reserved for only her husband now, and that'll come up right here in just a second. But Amnon knows that it's very difficult to touch Tamar for numerous reasons. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, and Jonadab was a very subtle man. This is David's nephew, Jonadab, and he's buddy-buddy with David's first son. And he said unto him, Why art thou, being the king's son, lean from day to day? Wilt thou not tell me? And Amnon said unto him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Oh, really? Really? Well, we learn later on that is not the case at all. It's a clear lie, but Amnon is overcome with lust. This is a problem in so many relationships. There's just lust, no love. Sometimes there's both present, but in this case, strictly lust. But also notice the vocabulary that Amnon is using right here with Jonadab, his cousin. He says, I'm in love with my brother Absalom's sister. It's your sister too, buddy. But he's changing the language. It's Absalom's sister. No, it's Amnon's half sister. Okay, but this is how they always do. Someone in whom is conspiring or plotting to sin, they have to change that vocabulary. If they're already in the sin, whatever it is, if they desire it, they change the vocabulary to make it more palatable. It's no longer murdering babies in the womb, it's abortion. It's no longer an abomination unto God, it's gay marriage. It's no longer the molestation of innocent children, it's pedophilia. You see how you got to soften these things up in order so that people will enjoy them more? Takes away some of the punch. Now, for anyone wondering how old that Amnon is right here, I can say from personal experience, being a man whom I'm 36 now, but in hindsight, I can look back and having the same type of libido that Amnon had. This is usually found within young men whom are about 18 to 25, 26, 27, within that age range. In my honest assessment, I believe that Amnon is about 23, 24, maybe 25 at this time. Tamar probably, let's say 17, 18, something like that. But I believe that because of his sexual desire, it's an overcoming feeling. Whenever I was that age, it was the same way. The older that you get, though, that kind of starts to not have so much of an effect on a man. It doesn't really, it's not wearing off. It's more, man, you've done lived through it. But speaking from a man's perspective, you've done experienced all that the fruit can bear from that, and you are looking for other things in life at this time. It's not like it's totally gone, but it's softened up a bit. I believe that he and Amnon is about 23, 24, and that would make David somewhere close to 50, if not a couple of years over 50, just to give good scope on this. So they start conspiring. And Jonadab said unto him, Lay thee down on thy bed, and make thyself sick. And when thy father cometh to see thee, say unto him, I pray thee, let my sister Tamar come, and give me meat, and dress the meat in my sight, that I may see it, and eat it at her hand. Notice how Jonadab is not very specific. It's only an insinuation. He's only saying, just make yourself sick, do this, do that. He's saying everything but, and then you can take her for yourself. He says everything but that. But he's not one to incriminate himself. It's just a unspoken agreement of what's going to happen between these two like-minded characters. So Amnon lay down and made himself sick, and when the king was come to see him, Amnon said unto the king, I pray thee, let Tamar my sister come, and make me a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat at her hand. Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, Go now to thy brother Amnon's house, and dress him meat. David, I have the feel that he reminds me of like one of these rich dads that spoil their children. I get that feeling from reading this. I don't know where it comes from. Maybe totally off the mark, but he seems to overindulge his children. But as we'll see, how Amnon he's lying to his father. He's conspiring, planning to get a woman within his vicinity so that he can have her to himself. Who does that sound like? Sounds an awful lot like his dad to me, David. David did the same thing. Now his son is doing similar. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was laid down, and she took flour and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight, and did bake the cakes. This is actually something like what that it would have looked like. There are certain women, or just cooks in general, around the world, Christians, that will look into these old recipes that they get from the scripture. And it's not cake. I used to make that mistake. How it always says that Elijah ate a cake, and and even in this situation right here, she's making her brother a cake. It's not a cake like what we know of. It's actually got a lot of good stuff involved in it. It was just sweet like a cake, and it was just, but it wasn't all sugary and bread and something terrible for you. No, this was actually a very good little meal. And she took a pan and poured them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, Have out all men from me. And they went out every man from him. But he refused to eat. He says, Bring her on over here, I'm hungry. Let her make me some food. Gets her on over there. He wasn't hungry at all. So he's lying. Oh, what a tangled web we weave. And Amnon said unto Tamar, Bring the meat into the chamber, that I may eat of thine hand. And Tamar took the cakes which she had made, and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. And when she had brought the men unto him to eat, he took hold of her and said unto her, Come lie with me, my sister. This is actually very sad for me to see. This is the crown prince of Israel, whom would have had no difficulty whatsoever. Even if he was ugly as sin, he could have gotten a woman very easily, a beautiful woman very easily, no doubt. David's son, next in line to be king. It'd been easy to have gotten a woman. Yet he chooses his half sister. It's not like it's a hard selling point to to tell a woman, hey, you want to be the next queen of Israel, my wife? It's not a very bad thing to say. All kinds of women would just dive right into that. Yet he takes, it's that forbidden fruit of him. And she answered him, Nay, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing ought to be done in Israel. Do not thou this folly. Me reading this it's completely undermining the desperation probably involved. You can just tell with the verbiage here. It's very she's trying to reason with a brute. This would have been a very terrifying situation to be in, a helpless situation. And Amnon, he seems like a spoiled brat. Those are the most unreasonable people, and she's trying to reason with one of the most unreasonable people in the kingdom. And I, whither shall I cause my shame to go? And as for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore, I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee. Because Tamar is not overcome with lust, like Amnon is in this situation, she's thinking clearly. She says, what will people say? It's amazing how lust can turn you into something totally different. But notice how Tamar is telling Amnon, just ask our father, and if you want me, he'll give me to you. Well, that's obviously a ploy. I don't think David ever in a million years would have done such. And it is also against the law of Moses. The nakedness in Leviticus 18, the nakedness of thy father's wife's daughter, begotten of thy father, she is thy sister, thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. This lets us men have just a peek on the severity of rape and what the emotional toll that it must take upon women. She is obviously trying any way in the world to get away. She's tried reasoning. She's tried telling him, what will people think? Are you crazy? She's basically telling him that you'll be as a fool in the town. And what about me? I'll be like a whore and incest. She says it's against the law and all these. She's very much in a helpless spot to be in. And she's trying to even use the law in some way, shape, or form. She says, just let's ask our father, and maybe it's a ploy to try to get him off of you. Stop, what you're doing. Anything. She is literally that's my point I'm trying to get across. She's trying to do anything to keep him from doing what he's doing. And nothing works. That is the power of lust. I used to have an old dog. She would get in heat, and we had these other male dogs that would run around. Keeping them out of the pen from her was impossible. They did things that they never would have done had she not been in heat. They were always very loyal. They listened. They had fear put in them, of man. At that point, they didn't care. They'd try to dig under it, try to go over the wall, everything completely irrational, out of their mind mentalities. And that's much like men whenever this happens, and I guess women as well. Howbeit he would not hearken unto her voice, but being stronger than she, forced her, and lay with her. Obvious rape. Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred wherewith he hated her was greater than the love wherewith he had loved her. And Amnon said unto her, Arise, be gone, get out. What is wrong with this fella? This is a very good showing of the transient nature of the flesh, how it's very short-lived, very short-sighted. the spirit is eternal. Whenever we think of God in heaven, it's forever. We can't even see the end, and it's joy unending. But with the flesh, and we've all experienced it, all of you can attest to this, once that you fulfilled the desires of the flesh, it's like you can't even remember it. It was so quick. And that is life on this earth. And we see that right after Amnon is done with her, probably didn't last very long at all, but the deed is done. And now he's done. He hates her, hated her exceedingly. That takes me aback. You spoiled brat, man. Probably had always gotten what he wanted from his rich daddy, King David, who never probably spanked him a day in his life, man. I would have busted this boy's hind end so many times, it's unbelievable. But he hates her now, and he tells her to get out. And she said unto him, There is no cause. This evil in sending me away is greater than the other that thou didst unto me. But he would not hearken unto her. This is a princess of Israel. No other man would dare treat her like this. But no sense in treating any woman like this. But a princess of Israel. She no doubt this shock she's in. She's traumatized, and now she's like being made to feel ugly and rejected. I've met guys like that who, after they've had the woman, they treat her like trash. It's like, man, come on. You're giving the rest of us a pretty bad name here. Women, it's a good way to get women to absolutely hate all men, as I have met so many women do. But now he's belittling her as if he could have any more than he already did. Then he called his servant that ministered unto him and said, Put now this woman out from me, and bolt the door after her. It's like taking out the trash or something. Bizarre. And she had a garment of divers colors upon her, for with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins apparelled. Then his servant brought her out and bolted the door after her. These robes were made for royalty, but also for virgins. It was to not show skin, not show the body. That's reserved for the husband. Much like Joseph, it's of diverse colors, of many colors. And we see what she does to it after this. And Tamar put ashes on her head, and rent her garment of diverse colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head, and went on crying. She's not even trying to cover this up. You know how a lot of women, or even men, have a tendency to have this victim, they blame themselves for something that someone else has done to them, in particular rape, molestation, what have you. She's not doing that. She knows that she's not in the wrong. She's not trying to hide it from anybody, but she doesn't run to David. Notice she runs to Absalom. And Absalom her brother said unto her, Hath Amnon thy brother been with thee? But hold now thy peace, my sister, he is thy brother. Regard not this thing. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. She doesn't go to David because David's not going to do anything. Obviously, it was a known thing that David just was lenient as could be. If you look at all these celebrity kids, these spoiled rich kids in Hollywood, or just rich kids in general for the most part, there are probably some good ones, few and far between, but if you look at these Hollywood spoiled rich kids, they're completely messed up in the head. The cocaine all the time, every day. They might take a break and, shoot meth in their eyeball or something. I don't know what they're doing, but they're doing the wildest thing possible because they have no discipline. They wreck their Lamborghinis and they don't care. Buy another one. Dad will buy me something else. Well, David is obviously not bringing up his children right. David's household is a wreck. But before we go any further, just one quick mention. Absalom immediately asked Tamar something very peculiar. Hath Amnon thy brother been with thee? Before she even tells him, why else would he ask? So I believe that it was a known, unspoken thing that Amnon had a crush or something on Tamar. That he would flirt with her, I suppose, here and there, or whatever. It was just probably a known thing to the brothers. maybe to the servants and others. But when King David heard of all these things, he was very wroth, and did nothing. And did nothing. Remember how he does nothing right here. That's going to come up later. And Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon, because he had forced his sister Tamar. He kept his cool. He says, okay, all right, buddy. And it came to pass after 2 full years that Absalom had sheep shearers in Belhazor, which is beside Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. This would have been, well, at the time of the sheep shearing, there was always a feast they would celebrate. So it was not out of the common thing to celebrate as Absalom is doing right here in Belhazor. Belhazor is up here. As you'll see, Shiloh, right here is Jerusalem, where his father would be. Here's Gibeah, all of these we have went over, Ramah, and right here is Belhazor. And Absalom came to the king, and said, Behold now, thy servant hath sheep shearers, let the king, I beseech thee, and his servants go with thy servant. Just like how Amnon went to the king, or requested of the king to be part of bringing Tamar to him, now Absalom is bringing David in to be some part of Amnon getting in his vicinity. So David, he has a hand in all of this, whether he likes it or not. And the king said to Absalom, Nay, my son, let us not all now go, lest we be chargeable unto thee. And he pressed him, howbeit he would not go, but blessed him. Absalom was begging David to come with him. Now, whether it was genuine or not, I'm not sure. It seems as though Absalom is very clever. I don't know. I would have done the same thing if I wanted to get Amnon alone. If I knew that my dad probably wouldn't go to something, I would really be adamant in my invitation, because I knew that he wouldn't come anyway. So that way it would set everything in a relaxed mode, no suspicion there. Then said Absalom, If not, I pray thee, let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said unto him, Why should he go with thee? It's very important. Keep up with this suspicion right here. That'll come up. But Absalom pressed him, that he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, Mark ye now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say unto you, Smite Amnon, then kill him. Fear not. Have not I commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. So Absalom has let his servants in on the trap. He's even using them to kill Amnon. I like Charles Ellicott's commentary on this. It was quite customary, he says, for the servants of a prince to obey his orders without question, leaving the entire responsibility to rest with him. In this case, if Chileab, the second in line to be the prince right above Absalom, if Chileab was already dead, as seems probable, Absalom stood next in the succession to Amnon, and his retainers may have looked upon this as a preparatory step towards the throne. So his servants may have been saying, well, if he gets rid of Amnon, he can be prince. Maybe that's what they were thinking. Maybe they knew the truth, and that is that Absalom wanted Amnon dead for revenge for what he did to Tamar. Because you have to also think that these servants would know that it was certain death to kill the crowned prince, no matter who was ordering you. It was certain death. So they may have also have known Tamar personally. More than likely they did. And they really liked her, and they looked at her probably as a sister as well. So they all may have been wanting to get revenge, because they did this without question. But before we go any further, why get Amnon drunk? You have to ask yourself, why get him drunk? To let down his guard, right? That's the natural response. Of course, that was it. But also, I believe that Amnon was suspicious of retaliation from Absalom. I believe that he may have thought, because this was 2 years later. And of course, in the beginning, you're going to have your suspicions that there's going to be retaliation. But after 2 years, that's a long time to hate somebody, mind you. That is a deep, deep hate. And the servants of Absalom did unto Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and every man gat him up upon his mule and fled. I really like John Trapp, his comments on this very act, the death of Amnon. He says, as David had committed adultery, made Uriah drunk, and then murdered him, so Amnon committeth incest, is made drunk, and then murdered, just like his father. The very same thing. You see how there's similarities there? And it came to pass, while they were in the way, that tidings came to David, saying, Absalom hath slain all the king's sons, and there is not one of them left. Then the king arose, and tare his garments, and lay on the earth, and all his servants stood by with their clothes rent. David did not question this. He was not shocked, really, by it. He wasn't taking it. No, he immediately begins the grieving period. Why did David just all of a sudden believe that Absalom could have it in him to kill and murder all of his sons? Because the first report is that Absalom has killed all of his sons. I believe it's because David was also suspicious and worried about retaliation from Absalom. Even after a couple of years, he was still worried about that. Remember how he asked, why do you want Absalom to go? Why do you want him to come there? They may have even tried to keep the two apart for a while. I kind of see that happening. And Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, once again, Jonadab, his nephew from the beginning, answered and said, let not my lord suppose that they have slain all the young men of the king's house, for Amnon only is dead. For by the appointment of Absalom this hath been determined from the day that he forced his sister Tamar. I would say that this is kind of a worried Jonadab at this point, because he's the very first one that implanted the plot in Amnon's head, and it has led to Amnon's death. So you kind of get, he's trying to butter up the king a little bit, get in his good graces. Because I don't know, I would be very worried too. Now therefore let not my lord the king take the thing to his heart, to think that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon only is dead. And the king of Israel himself, David, has to take some of this blame upon himself. He has to. Because he becomes angry with Amnon after hearing that he raped his daughter Tamar, but he does nothing. If David would have went by scripture, something would have been done. At least something would have been done. Deuteronomy 22:28 says, if a man find a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold on her, and lie with her, and they be found, then the man that lay with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he hath humbled her. He may not put her away all his days. So that's what God recommends for premarital sex. If you lay with a woman, marry her. It's not like a death penalty or anything, but also pay 50 shekels of silver. The value, the equivalence of that in today's money, it varies so broadly. I found one really generalized way to say this. It's about 200 days worth of labor, 200 days worth of payment that the young man would give to the father of the woman. And this brings me to my point of why David has to bear some of the blame. Because if he would have at least done that to Amnon and maybe inflicted some other kind of fatherly punishment upon him, if he would have done something, take away half a year's wages, that'll straighten him up a little bit. But that would have saved Amnon's life. I'm persuaded of this. That would have saved his life. That would have restored some of the dignity that Tamar had lost. There would have been a little justice involved. That would have assuaged the anger of Absalom. If only just slightly, that may have still have saved the life of his son Amnon. But the sword shall not depart from his house. This was prophesied was going to happen. But it's because of David, I believe, that all of this ultimately got way out of control. And I also believe that it's because of his own judgment being marred by his own prior transgressions. He says, well, everybody's a sinner. A lot of preachers preach way too soft on sin because of they may have been caught in whatever kind of transgression in the past, or they may just be aware of their own sinful nature. And I'm not saying be a hellfire preacher. I'm just saying there's nothing wrong with being a hellfire preacher, as a matter of fact. But I'm not saying you haven't got to go to that extent, but at least don't be soft. Don't be Joel Osteen. It's far worse to be a Joel Osteen than an outright hellfire preacher. Far worse. But Absalom fled, and the young man that kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there came much people by the way of the hillside behind him. And Jonadab said unto the king, Behold, thy king's sons come, as thy servant said, so it is. And it came to pass, as soon as he had made an end of speaking, that behold, the king's sons came, and lifted up their voice, and wept, and the king also and all his servants wept ever sore. But Absalom fled, and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. And David mourned for his son every day. Remember what we said at the very beginning of this study, who is the king of Geshur? Absalom's granddad. It's his mother's father. So he goes to grandpa. he says, well, that's it. I'm getting out of here, and maybe grandpa. I've seen men do that. That's it. I'm getting away from dad. I'm going to go to grandpa. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. You can already tell the pieces of this mighty kingdom of a household that he has built starting to chip away. Not the kingdom of Israel, but of his household. It's starting to rapidly deteriorate right before his very eyes. What a very painstaking life to live. Now that we can look back and see what all happens to David, because this is just really the beginning. But after we look back and see all these horrors that come upon him, the last, we'll say, 30 years of his life, 25, whatever. Once that we look back and see all of that, now we can say, oh man, how terrible. What an absolutely horrible life to have led. It got started so well, and the nation itself prospered under him, but his own house was just in shambles. And if David would have just known the atrocities to come, I believe he'd have just had mental breakdown after breakdown. So it's a good thing that these things come to us piecemeal, But that is it for today's study. And as I said, it's only beginning for David. This is a very rough chapter, but it doesn't really get much easier. Thank you all for joining me. Tomorrow, Lord willing, we'll pick up in chapter 14. Lord of peace be with you. Amen.